In round 2 of Norway Chess, Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So faced each other. They started with a classical game, which ended in a draw. And they have the tradition in Norway Chess that when the regular game is finished in a draw, then the players are going to play an Armageddon game. Which means that white is having 10 minutes and black is playing with less time, which is of course an advantage for white, but the pressure is on white because white is in a must-win situation. So these Armageddon games, they lead to really spectacular type of chess. And the following game, Magnus is playing with the white pieces. Sit there for a couple of minutes, watch the entire video, because you will get entertained. Let's have a look. Magnus opens with 1 e4, and after e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6. It's the Berlin defense. d3, we are not going to see the endgame. Very solid move to protect the pawn on e4, bishop c5, and now after bishop takes c6, black recaptures with its d pawn. Now it's very important to understand that white cannot win the pawn on e5 yet. Why? Because there is the move queen to d4 with a double attack, and white will be forced to give up a piece in order to avoid mate. So therefore white doesn't take the pawn yet, but castles first. So now, having castled, the king is safe and the rook is protecting the pawn on f2. That means that white is intending now to take on e5. So black's next move will be a move to protect the pawn. Interestingly, Wesley So played in the regular game the move knight d7, which is a perfectly playable move, but it may look a little bit strange to block the path of your bishop with your knight, but very often the knight will be rerouted later on, for example via f8 to e6. But okay, in the Armageddon game, which we are going to look at now, is the move bishop d6 played by Wesley So, which is also a very reasonable option. So the bishop protects the pawn, and now after white goes bishop g5, pinning the knight on g5, or knight on f6, sorry, black went for the move h6, attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back to h4, perfectly fine, and now the move queen e7 played. And interestingly, I mean, these Berlin games, they have been played millions of times among these top players. Magnus Carlsen had an earlier outing against Hikaru Nakamura, and in that game followed the logical developing move knight b2. It's kind of a close game with a lot of maneuvering. But now for the Armageddon game, he thought, let's try to put pressure on Wesley. He wants to open the game with the move d4. This is going to be really exciting. Now, there are ideas to take on e5, but most importantly, if you do take the pawn on d4, white's playing for a trick, as he wants to go e5, hitting the bishop and the knight. If the bishop takes the pawn, it's knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, and rook e1. And thanks to a skewer, you do win the queen. That means the pawn cannot be taken, but instead black has a lot of other good options, and particularly the move played in the game, bishop g4, developing a piece, pinning that knight on f3 is just a good move. Now if white does take the pawn on e5, it's bishop takes e5, and I think black is having a very comfortable game. When the position gets opened, in general, the bishops are doing better than its counterparts, the knights. So white instead played here the move knight bd2, but I don't think black has any problems here. He can even castle queenside. All black's pieces are nicely, actively placed, trying to fight against white's pawns in the center. Therefore, white played here the move rook e1. Once again, don't take on d4 because it runs into the move e5 and white is winning material. But instead, very good move by So. He went for the move g5, attacking the bishop, unpinning the knight on f6. Black is in really good shape. After bishop goes back to g3, only move, there followed the move knight h5, putting more pressure, and who knows, maybe black is even going to take on g3 next. So what is white supposed to do here? Well, I was thinking if you do take on e5, it would be very logical to take on e5 back. And now after bishop takes, there's a funny line, bishop takes f3. You cannot take with the knight because the queen is hanging in that case, but you can take with the queen. And now after queen takes e5, still both knights are hanging, and white is doing quite okay. You may still play knight c4, attacking the queen. The knight is still under threat, but after queen e6, maybe white is just a little bit better, because black has a double pawn, white has a nice extra pawn on the other side of the board. Anyway, this was probably not even Wesley's intention, because after d takes e5, he's not interested in trading off its good pieces. If you play bishop c5, you do keep a lot of activity with these powerful bishops. The bishop on g4 pinning the knight on f3, the rook pins the knight on d2. I think this is really worth a pawn, and black has a lot of piece activity. But Magnus didn't capture on e5. Instead, he wanted to hold on to its pawn center. But look, now there follows the move e takes d4. What should white do? Recapturing seems to be very logical. We'll get there in a second. But if you take on d6, then black is going to take back with the queen. C takes d4. And now look, spectacular move. Was definitely spotted by both players. Queen takes d4. Making use of the pin. If you do, capture the queen. Bishop takes d1. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes knight. We do the material count and we see that black has just one extra pawn. This is a better endgame for black. Therefore, Magnus didn't want to take on d6. Instead, he decided to take on d4. And now, look what Wesley played here. He went for the move bishop b4 with tremendous pressure exerted by the bishops on the knights. Very nicely display of how these bishops are working against pinned knights. Black is in really good shape. White decided to run away with the queen, attacking the bishop. Well, the bishop is still defended, of course, by the queen, but at least the queen is no longer standing in the pin and looking for an idea to take on a7. Now, the move bishop takes f3 was played. This is very critical. If you do take back with the pawn, there is bishop takes d2 and black is a piece up. So white is now forced to give up material. He played the move knight takes f3 and then it's bishop takes e1, and you would think white is going to recapture with the rook, but then okay, black is just going to protect its pawn on a7, king b8, or maybe even something like a6. I don't see the compensation, but look what Magnus had planned, definitely in advance. Was it a bluff? Was it a brilliant calculation? Let's see. Rather than recapturing the bishop, he just makes a full rook sacrifice. He has sacrificed the rook. It has been taken already. And rather than taking the piece, he takes on a7. So the queen is going after the king. Is this a good idea? Well, it really depends. If you get a time to even capture the bishop next, that would be quite nice compensation. You get a bishop, a pawn, and some pieces attacking the black king would be excellent news. So, for instance, if you try to save the bishop, what is white going to do? Well, you can give a check, but then the king runs away. But wait a second, before allowing the king to run away, we can just take away that square with the move knight e5, and it's just game over. The king is caught in a mating net, as queen a8 will be played next. It's going to be checkmate. Therefore, black has to find an alternative plan, and the key move here is the move queen to b4. Very, very nice idea, so that the queen is planning to go to a5, so that the bishop even still supports the queen, forcing the exchange of queens. Well, if the queens will come off, the attack is just over and black will enjoy its extra material. Therefore, rook takes e1 played. So now this had to be played, obviously. And, well, white is an exchange down, but there are still a bit of tactical play here, of course. So what are the options? Well, in the game, knight takes g3 was played, but maybe the move g4 would have been just possible because you're attacking the knight. If the knight goes away, look, the queen can just take on e1 and it's checkmate. So knight e5 is not possible. Therefore, well, the knight cannot move, but the rook is hanging. White has only the move a3 here, attacking the queen. So try to force the queen to go away. If the queen would take on the pawn on b2, it's knight e5, and once again, it's going to be checkmate on the next move. But a key defense for black, rather than taking the pawn, is to try to force the exchange of queens with the move queen b6. Now the queen is hanging, the knight is hanging, you cannot do too much. For instance, if you do exchange queens, then everything just looks absolutely fine. Knight e5, pieces are getting swapped, h takes g3, rook takes d4, black is going to win this for sure. But in the game, there followed the immediate move knight takes g3, h takes g3, and what is going to be played next? Well, if you would play g4 now with the same tactical idea, trying to deflect the knight from protecting the rook, it's knight e5. It is possible now, because after queen takes e1, it is king h2. You're 2 rooks down, but the king is caught in a mating net. That doesn't work. What should black do? Well, there's only one move which can offer black maybe an advantage, but it's incredibly difficult to find. Well, maybe not even to find, just to play it, because apparently the move king d7, trying to run away with the king, placing your king in a potential knight check, it's apparently quite good, because the white queen is still far away from the action, and if black has like one more move, there could follow rook a8, trying to initiate the exchange of queens one more time. Didn't happen. Wesley tried to do it safe, not by running away with the king, but with the move queen b6, offering the exchange of queens. Now there's a queen check on a8, king d7, and well, now the queen gotta go back. Maybe queen a3 is an interesting move. Anyway, knight e5 check is not too clever, because it does allow king e8, and then both the queen and the pawn on d4 are hanging. So you better make sure that the queen goes back, for instance to a4, which was played, and now the pawn on d4 is still on the board. So definitely, if we do the material count, things are looking not too badly here at all. What should black do? Aim for exchanges. So queen b5 would be a good move, but instead Wesley So played here the move f6, preventing the knight from coming in to e5. But now very soon there are ideas of breaking through with the pawns. First, Magnus played the move d5. He may have considered even to play e5 straight away, bringing up the e-pawn, either to take, either to advance, or if pawn is going to be exchanged, the knight can come in to e5. That would be really cool stuff. But d5 was played as well, with ideas of opening the d-file, maybe the rook can come over. Anyway, after the move king to c8, because of course with the king on d7, you are not allowed to take on d5 because of the pin, so the king goes away anyway. But now e5, just very cool attacking stuff. These two pawns are just there to open up the position, and well, with such an exposed king, you would not even feel that you're material down. If you take the pawn on d5, then it's rook a8, sorry, queen a8, and the rook on h8 is just hanging. That is not an option at all. The alternative could be to take the pawn with the c pawn, but then e takes f6 could be just a very nice move. And now taking the pawn would not be a great idea, because it runs into queen a8, king to d7, and now simple move here, queen takes b7. You're collecting pawns, you're an exchange down, but doesn't matter. Knight e5, queen takes d5, a lot of ideas. Queen, rook and knight working together against such a king definitely offers great chances. What should black have done instead? Try to go for the exchange of queens. Once again, queen a6 would have been a very sensible defensive idea, so that white can no longer enter with the queen via the a file. In the game, the move king b8 was played. Black tried to hide with its king on the b file, but look what's happening now. E takes f6 on the board. If you do take the pawn on d5, then the f pawn is going to run, with the plan of playing rook e8 next, and thanks to the pawn on f7 you have promotion ideas. Rook dd8, the rook gotta go back, but now this pawn is an additional weapon. You can play knight e5, the knight comes in, and the black rooks are really struggling to join the game. This looks awesome for white. In the game, c takes d5 was played, and anyway, the pawn went to f7. Now black tried to eliminate that pawn with queen f6, but the knight came in to e5 with excellent control. You're supporting the pawn on f7, very difficult to eliminate it, while if you, as black, try to push your own pawn, there would follow knight d7 with a huge knight fork. Rook takes d7 is forced to avoid the loss of a queen, but then you take with the queen, rook e8 is next, black's position is falling apart and the f-pawn is deciding the game. Therefore, Wesley played here the move rook h2 f8, intending to take the pawn. But look, if you play knight d7 now, it's rook takes, queen takes f7, and you do force the exchange of queens, because you're also threatening to take on f2. Black is doing absolutely fine, but this must have been calculated by both players in advance. Okay, it's Armageddon, there's not much time to work things out, but look at the cool idea played by Magnus. Instead of playing knight d7, he brought his rook into the play via the third rank. Rook a3 is on the agenda. If you do something like rook takes f7. That was the original plan. We are not going to take because things are not that clear at all. Rather than grabbing back the material, we keep this knight on the board, preparing rook a3 with a deadly mating threat on a8. There's no time to escape with the king because it's queen a8 with checkmate and the knight still covers that square. Therefore, you got to create an escape for your king. c6 played, but now white is really fast. Queen a7 check, king c7, rook b3, attacking the pawn on b7. If you take on e5 the knight, there will be rook takes b7, king d6, and you take on f7. And this position, black has a pawn down, but the position is really bad. If you play something like d4, it's queen c7 with a double attack. So that's the first threat you gotta deal with. But if you move the rook away, there will follow a bunch of checks. For instance, queen d7, king c5, b4, just try to open up the position, very simple. King takes, and now queen takes c6, and queen and rook, they are going to give checkmate. It's not about calculating all these lines, it's just about feeling that the black king is just wide open, whereas the white king can always hide on h2, being surrounded by its own pawns. Therefore, the knight still cannot be taken. Rook b8 had to be played to protect the pawn on b7, but now there is this beautiful move. The rook had done its job on the queen side, now goes to the other side on the third rank. f3 is the square to go to with the point that you're threatening the queen. If the queen moves, the rook is hanging as the knight, and rook are both attacking the rook on f7. Queen takes e5, only move. Rook takes f7 with check. Where is the king going? If king goes to d6, then it's just queen takes b8. You're winning the rook. Trade of queens, game over. So the king gotta go back to the back rank. King d8 was played, but now after rook f8, you have a skewer. You're going to win the rook on b8 next. Wherever you go with a king, let's say king c7, you just take with the queen and it's game over. So therefore, after the move rook f8, black resigned. But what an amazing game this was. It looked as if black was doing just extremely well out of the opening with massive pressure exerted against the center with the bishops. But then Magnus in trouble came up with a very genius kind of exchange sacrifice. Initially it was a rook sacrifice. It turned out into an exchange sacrifice. But oh man, this could have gone totally wrong for the former world champion. Thanks for both players for creating such an amazing masterpiece. The big winner of this game is the audience. I really enjoyed watching this game. I hope you did as well. If so, just make sure to subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more exciting games like this one.